I gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy. Remarkable?
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. This week, we're talking about B2B marketing lessons from Harry Potter with Director of Content Strategy at SAP Concur, Kendra Walters.
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
Kendra, how are you?
I am doing great, and I am magically stoked to be here with you guys today to talk about two of my favorite things, Harry Potter and content marketing.
You're probably wondering why we brought you here today. No, at this point, Professor, I just kind of go with it. We're going to talk Harry Potter, one of my all-time favorites, probably my favorite content as well on this wide earth. Why did you pick Harry Potter to talk about today?
You know, as a lover of stories, Harry Potter is probably the most formative story in my, adult life. I remember being 19 years old and picking up my first Harry Potter book, which I did read out of order. So interesting story, but being just completely hooked and drawn into the characters. And, I've been obsessed with it ever since. So going on 20 years of completely obsessed with Harry Potter, down to all of the nerdy things that you can think of, going on forums, coming up with theories. Some of my favorite memories. My love for Harry Potter runs deep so much that I have it inked on my skin. I do not have any of my family members, family members, so that'll tell you how much I love it. And I'm just really excited to relate it to everything content today.
And zooming out, tell us a little bit about your role at SAP Concur.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, SAP Concur, it's a travel and expense software company and a division of SAP. We make it possible for businesses to simplify everyday tasks and make business travel a breeze. We use AI to automate processes like auditing expense reports and approvals, so employees can focus more on their day jobs and less on time on expense reports. So my team and I focus specifically on the content strategy for our largest enterprise prospects and customers. We help our field marketing team to align content to their campaigns, create targeted content for industries, personas, and all stages of the funnel. It's our job to make sure assets are brand compliant, and we ladder that messaging up to our corporate marketing messaging as well as greater SAP messaging. So we're really kind of that connective tissue between our brand messaging and what our prospects and customers in enterprise throughout the various industries and job functions want to seek out and find as far as it relates to their travel and expense needs.
Meredith, what the heck is Harry Potter?
So Harry Potter is this truly magical story about this orphan boy named Harry Potter who finds out he's a wizard.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire.
So the story follows Harry and his closest friends, Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, and their students at Hogwarts School of Wizardry.
You're Harry Potter. I'm Hermione Granger. And you are?
Ron Weasley.
Pleasure.
So it started as a series of 7 books by author J.K. Rowling, the first being Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which was released in 1997.
Yeah, so Meredith, tell us about how it was conceived and created in the first place.
Yeah, so this was really interesting. I thought when I was doing research, I watched a bunch of interviews with J.K. Rowling, and they're always on a train, which I thought was interesting.
There must be a mistake. This says platform 9 3/4. There's no such thing. Is there?
But this is where the idea for Harry Potter came from. So in 1990, J.K. Rowling was living in London and she had decided to move to Manchester with her then boyfriend. And so she was on this long train ride back to London after flat hunting or apartment hunting that she says,
Harry Potter came to me on a train in 1990. I was sitting just staring out of the window and the idea just fell out of nowhere. It was the purest stroke of inspiration I've ever had in my life.
And it was something about like how trains carry you to other places and the experience is like a bit magical.
The single idea was Harry, this boy who didn't know he was a wizard, who for 11 years had made very odd stuff happen, that there was plainly mystery about him, but he didn't know what it was, and that then he got the letter that told him he had a place at wizard school.
And so she told Urbanet magazine, coincidentally, I didn't have a pen and was too shy to ask anyone for one on the train, which frustrated me at the time, but when I look back, it was the best thing for me. It gave me the full 4 hours on the train to think up all the ideas for the book. So in the next 5 years, right, so she's working on the manuscript for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which we know in the US as the Sorcerer's Stone. And she went through a lot. Like her mom passed away. She found herself divorced and living as a single mother. She moved to Scotland. And she described herself as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. So she really like struggled through this time, but she was driven to complete this manuscript because she was about to go into training as a teacher. And she was like really struggling to find a publisher after that. She said the first agent I'd sent my first 3 chapters off to had sent my manuscript back so fast that it seemed like they sent it back the same day it arrived, which was really interesting because it's become such a hit. You know, it's like, why didn't people see that this was gold? And even then, like, this is August of 1996, this guy, Barry Cunningham, who was working at Bloomsbury, was looking at her manuscript and he said, and this is a quote, I just sat there in my office and tried to understand the rules of Quidditch.
Each team has 7 players, 3 chasers, 2 beaters, 1 keeper, and the seeker. That's you. There are 3 kinds of balls. This one's called the quaffle. Now the chasers handle the quaffle and try to put it through one of those 3 hoops. The keeper, that's me, defends the hoops. With me so far?
And I thought, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was a silly title. But then he said, I loved the story and the heroism. I liked the friendship between the 3 main characters. The owls and the magic was great. I mean, that's so like dry, you know, as far as...
It's so funny. It's super English. It reminds me how people talk about Game of Thrones and they say it's sex and dragons. And it's like, you know, and it's like to the most reductive viewer, you can like it just for the magic and the owls and the friends, you know, and for, you know, other people, you can go literally miles and miles and miles deep into the meaning and the content and the world and all that stuff. And like, that is truly the mark of a great story, right? Is like, you can go as far as you'd like into the world.
Talk about this a little bit later too, but I think like the magic, like this fantastical world, like Harry Potter takes place in this world of wizards and dragons and spells.
There's where you get your quills and your ink. And over there, all your bits and bobs for doing your wizardry.
And, you know, all of these crazy things, but the characters, you know, are relatable. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a story about kids at a boarding school.
And the idea of getting into this place that is so exciting and living there among your peers, it's just enthralling, I think.
So you can be fantastical and magical, but then you can also relate to falling in love for the first time, going to classes, feeling like a fish out of water, like all of these things. So to reduce it just down to that simplicity, I think is not doing it any favors. But
but it's funny. I mean, I remember the first time I heard about it. I think I was in 6th grade, and one of the kids in school did his like book report on Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I was like, this sounds like the stupidest thing I've heard in my entire life. Like, what is this kid talking about? It sounds like a kid's book, right? And so my story, which is, we'll interrupt a little bit of this here, but since we're already talking about it. So my story is that my mom, for her birthday, she said that the only thing that she wants for her birthday is for me to read the first chapter of Harry Potter. That was it. She was like, you're going to love this. Just read the first chapter. And I was a pretty big reader, and I liked fantasy, and I liked all sorts of nerdy stuff like that. And so I was like, For you, Mom, the world, right? Of course, I can read the first chapter of the book and I ended up becoming hooked. And so I have this very, I have a relationship with my mom who loves, a lot of the stories that I tell now and fiction and murder mysteries and all that stuff is all stuff that she loved and still loves. And so I have this relationship with Harry and my mom and then my sister and I, and reading it, I read it out of order 2. I read 1, 3, and then 2. But yeah, it's like, in the first chapter, it's like this whisks you away on a journey that like literally will span a lifetime for anyone who, fell in love with it. Let's see what else.
A couple of things that I think J.K. Rowling did really well is one is like speaking to her audience. So she was really playing to the child's psyche in that she knew when she was little, she would look at her parents and be like, these boring people can't be my parents, right?
You're a wizard, Harry.
And then the other thing was she knows kids want to feel truly special, almost like chosen.
Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry.
And then also being famous on top of it. So kind of playing to that.
Bless my soul. It's Harry Potter.
And when she started, another thing she did that was cool in her creative process was when she started to get fan mail for the books, she was taking ideas from these elements. Like kids would draw like picture books and things like that. So she would use that to inspire her writing too. And another thing she did was she was a meticulous planner. So she knew where the books were going to go and she would plan out like long in advance and draw these connections. So like later in the book, she'll pull up resurface these plot points later down the line and you would have like almost forgotten about them. And then they come up later, which I know, Kendra, was something that you loved about it. So what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, we'll talk about the plotting and just how carefully scripted the plotting is and how well thought out it is. And, a lot of the things that J.K. Rowling seeds in the very early chapters of some of the books actually come into play in the series finale, which I think is just so expertly done. It shows planning, it shows diligence. Some examples of this are, Horcruxes aren't even mentioned until book 6, but there's a Horcrux, which is the lost diadem of Ravenclaw, in which the couple of the house ghosts had a play in hiding this diadem, which Voldemort eventually finds. She mentions that Voldemort was in Albania where the diadem was hidden in book 1. And that doesn't even come into play until book 7. So just think about like how much you have to, this is such a complex plot through 7 books. Each story is a story in and of itself, but then the whole story of 7 books, that takes a lot of planning and that takes a lot of, meticulous thought, like you mentioned, Meredith. There's another one that I want to talk about too, which is how the ending, but I think that plays a little bit more into kind of like the series that don't stick the landing in the end. And then, this one, the plotting relates to this ending that only works if you're threading it through the entire thing. And there's a line in the Deathly Hallows at the end of the book that just seems like a throwaway line. It's 8 words. I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but it's something to the effect of, Harry grabbed the wands out of Draco's hand. That simple 8-line phrase ends up playing in the very ending of the book. At the book's climax or resolution when Harry ultimately defeats Voldemort. And this line is just a throwaway line. You would scan right over it and not even notice it. But so that's how careful, everything is plotted and thought out.
Yeah. The first thing for me about the planning piece is it's planning in a combination with pacing. I think that's why this is one of the best stories of all time, is because every single next page of the book, you are learning more about the world until the very end, until the last page of the book, you are learning more about the world. And she continues to build on it and make it more expansive. You never feel inundated with information. Like, to look at the converse of this, which is also a masterful story, A Song of Ice and Fire and the Game of Thrones, all of the books there, where like the point is that you are inundated with everything. You're inundated with so much complexity as the the world is complex. Whereas what J.K. Rowling does in these books is she tells you exactly what you need to know, well pacing it so quickly that each thing you're just jumping to the next thing. And you care so much about, Harry and just becoming a boy who has friends and has, goes to a school and learns about magic and all that. And Harry's obviously our avatar as a viewer. And she's able to plot that stuff out so well, and that it feels so earned. Every single piece of it feels so earned. And it's truly like a page turner, right? Like you can't put it down. And for 7 books and thousands and thousands and thousands of words, it's a pretty incredible feat. And she wraps up every single bow so tightly because it's planned so well. And it's just, it's remarkable that she's able to do that.
Yeah, George, if you're out there listening, we're still waiting. So
yeah, no, that's right.
Not everyone can stick the landing like that.
It's, I've thought about it and I've come to grips with the fact that much like our own world, like it's okay if there's not an ending to the story because it's a sprawling epic. But that is a big difference, right? Is like these stories don't just stick the landing. They stick every single possible landing. It leaves you with so much sadness and misery and happiness, and you feel like earned and justified that all the people who were lost, serve for something greater, and that, all these things. I mean, like truly, it is just exceptional. And she toyed with all sorts of things that she didn't end up doing. She talked about potentially killing Ron. She talked about, I think, killing both Fred and George, some other stuff. She killed arguably like one of the greatest fiction characters of all time with Dumbledore. And it was so painful. But then when you get to the end of 7 and you're like, oh, it actually needed to happen. It's just incredible what she did. It's a perfect story, I think.
Yeah, I think like Half-Blood Prince, in my opinion, is one of the best books ever written. And that's a book with Voldemort isn't even in it. Right. So to build this world where you care so deeply about all of the characters, so much that the main villain isn't even in the story in his true form, I think is a masterful achievement. And Ian, you mentioned the world building earlier from the first chapter. I mean, I think from that moment that you open The Boy Who Lived, you're transported. And I think that truly is a masterful achievement, like from the very beginning to the very end, to be just transported.
Yeah. And I think that, the final thing that I'll say here on, because we could talk for hours and hours and hours about how remarkable Harry Potter is, but just from an overall perspective, from a story perspective, that as you age, you experience it completely differently. Right. And so like, I'm basically the same age as Harry. Right. And so when I was reading it at that time in my life, like I very much, I felt a lot of those same feelings and went through that thing. And then now, as an adult and someone who has, a very little boy, I see it very differently. And I associate way more with Dumbledore than I do, with Harry at this point. And he gives a quote, and I think it's like one of my favorite quotes in fiction, that Dumbledore says, "Youth cannot know how age thinks and feels, but old men are guilty if they forget what it is to be young." And it's like the best encapsulation of like getting older. And I think about it all the time. We have younger employees. We have, like how hot-headed and young I was once, and perhaps, still am in some ways, and how, Dumbledore has to deal with all of this stuff and does it completely wrong most of the time, but he's trying and it works out in the end. And I think that like that, just there's a million quotes, there's a million pieces in there that you can pull out and take away personally at whatever age you're at, whether you're an old man or woman or someone young. And that's like, again, the mark of just brilliant storytelling and making you connect with characters that are, doing magic and have wands and, have jumping chocolate frogs and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, the life lessons isn't something that I thought of when in preparation for this podcast, but it is something that is very close to my heart and that is truly like translatable across whether it's your business environment or your life with your children. I mean, there's a reason now us millennials are reading these books to our kids. So,
I mean, if you go and read like the top, 50 Dumbledore quotes, they may as well be Confucius. I mean, it's like, it's so good. It's like crazy. In preparation for this, I was reading a bunch of Dumbledore quotes and I'm like, these are like like pillar life lessons. It's just like incredible stuff. To a well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. You're just like, Jesus, that is some weighty stuff. Yeah, and it's incredible. Let's talk marketing. What were your big marketing takeaways from Harry Potter?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about the plotting. I think as content marketers, storytelling is a huge part of what we do. I think, having a red thread, a continuous story that you tell your customers or you want your prospect and customers to follow is really important. Know why you're doing the things that you do. Don't just do, our favorite phrase, random acts of marketing. Have something, a storyline or multiple storylines that connects everything together. Whether that's pillars, whether that's personas, whatever that is, that red thread is going to carry through, from the top of the funnel when someone's seeking you out in SEO all the way to the bottom when you close and even through renewals. Like, I think, just knowing why a customer or prospect should care about your solution or about your company and what business challenges that solves for them is really important. So that's number one. I think if you dig, double down on that even more, I mentioned this before, that each Harry Potter book, there's 7 books. Each book is a story, an individual story with mystery and plots and subplots, but there's also a cohesive story of 7 books. I think that we can relate this really closely to marketing and how we tell our story. You've got your brand voice and you've got your, higher level messaging pillars, but then you've also got your segments and you've got your channels and you've got different sub-stories or different products. So however you want to segment that, I think you have to be able to work backward from what your audience is looking for up to, your brand values. So I think looking at, your storytelling like a 7-chapter or a 7-part book with multiple subplots, I think is a good way to think about it.
Yeah. To double down on that, I think it's all about structure. And I think that I talk about this a lot with the murder mysteries that we do with shows like Murder in HR, that it has this propulsive element to the story that, a body drops in the first episode. You got to figure out why that happened by the end. With Harry Potter, she doesn't do that. There isn't necessarily a body that drops or something like that. There is all of these mysteries that she starts to unfold. But what you have is, from the very beginning, when Harry Potter gets into Hogwarts, that he has 7 years of school and that he's going to go through this journey. He's going to go from a kid who didn't know what magic was to something at the end of 7 years. And you don't know what that something is. And you have no idea, all the different things. And there's obviously this main thread of his connection to Voldemort and, him having to defeat this person. But you don't know that from the first minute. Voldemort's dead. He's gone, right? Like, once you learn that he is not, in fact, there. So what is the thing that sort of, keeps you going is that structure. That each book is a year, that you have this just unbelievable closure. Every single book that feels so good, end of the school year, and then each book starts with summertime and Harry's miserable and he's doing all this crazy stuff. And I think that because she has such an organized mind and because the story is so organized and has so much structure, that it allows for the reader to understand exactly what they're getting into each book and to know, what is going on and to feel like what is happening in a book where there's like so many different things happening. And I think a great example is like the final book, which is absolutely crazy. I don't think we could have done that for 7 years. I don't think we could have had this story feel the way it was if it was all over the place, right? If like after the end of book 1, there was no more Hogwarts, right? And he just was going around doing crazy things for the rest, it would just feel completely different. But the fact that we go back to this school, we know all the stuff, we know the characters, we learn more about it, and that has that structure is super valuable. And so to wrap that up into our B2B marketing, which is you need to have structure. Like you need to have things that you can, signpost for your audience so that they know exactly what they're getting into. This is the reason why listicles do really well and have been since the 10 Commandments, right? Like listicles are really important, so it's like, those are the sort of things that like you have to do. And using something like 7 years of school, or, whatever it is, the 90 days of onboarding a new customer, or whatever those artificial or real time constraints are that you have, that exactly what needs to happen, because then time is running out and things are happening. There's no ticking clock in this other than school, right? Like, Voldemort is coming to power. Harry needs to fight him. He could beat him at any moment, right? So what's the ticking clock there? It's like, the structure of the 7 years of Hogwarts. That's kind of the only thing.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there's a formulaic structure to the books layered on top of, all of these subplots and plots and characters and all these people that you meet. And so, yeah, I think like having that formula to your campaigns or your content or whatever is a great way to think about it.
All right. Second marketing takeaway.
Yeah. The second marketing takeaway I really was super interested in talking about was something that I, am a huge participant in. My college friend used to make fun of my screen names on the forums. And so I really would be remiss to not mention the fan participation and user-generated content that this whole group and community sort of formed around, right? So I don't know if either of you went to J.K. Rowling's original website, but she used to leave Easter eggs there that would lead to even more theorizing. There were tons of forums you could dig in with other people in the community and other fans of the books and like theorize whether, like, who was that fourth Death Eater, that was in the circle, in the graveyard with Harry? Was it Snape? Was it not Snape? Like, who is the one who ran away? Like, you could, talk for hours about digging into these crazy theories. Or some of them turned out to be right. Like, people would glom onto the smallest details. Like, oh, was that crown that Harry saw in the Room of Requirement when he put his potions book in there, was that significant? Well, turns out it was pretty significant. So, those types of things, you can only really span that kind of fandom if you have a great story, which is, something we spent a good deal of time talking about. Some of the very first podcasts ever were from Harry Potter, Pottercast and Mugglecast. People created jobs out of this fandom. Like, there are people whose jobs are literally to talk about Harry Potter all day. Binge Mode, another great podcast for people who haven't checked it out. They did a whole Harry Potter deep dive for which I have cried listening to several.
Oh, yeah.
So shout out to those guys over there at Binge Mode. But
yeah, it's still my favorite podcast of all time. Binge Mode Harry Potter is the best podcast, I think in history.
Yeah. And I think like who wouldn't want to create raving fans out of their customers, right? So I think Harry Potter nailed it on the head when they, did that, right? Like, J.K. Rowling created raving fans out of her consumers, people that are creating content based on her content. So that I think is something that makes it really remarkable.
Yeah. So I would add to that part of the reason that sort of thing happened was that she created a mystery that was worth solving. And so much B2B content has no mystery, right? But there's an adage, the most boring story is facts or something like that. I forget the adage. But basically, like, most B2B marketing or content is literally just telling you what the thing is, right? And it's not creating any controversy. It's not creating multiple points of view. It's not debating things that could happen. And like, for Harry Potter and any good, mystery or story, you talk about it. You talk to your friends about it. I remember we talked about and debated, is Snape good or bad, for so long. I mean, like, so long. We had bets going. We had, all that stuff. And in B2B marketing, you need to create stuff that people can disagree about, that they can hear both sides, that it's not one size fits all. The answer to every solution isn't just your product, but yet that's what we want to make, right? We always want to make that, the all drains lead to the ocean sort of marketing, which I agree with. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, you also have to be able to provide differing opinions and exploring those things and create discussion. And that's how you create a community. Like, a community is not just people who think the exact same thing going in one direction. It's a place where you can create dialogue amongst people who generally feel the same way about things, but also feel differently about things. And, people there's all sorts of things within Harry Potter where, people like Harry and Hermione together, and there's all sorts of different things that people feel, and they're entitled to all those opinions. They get to discuss them. But in B2B marketing, we rarely create anything that's worth talking about. And I think that if you add in another perspective or bring in people who can disagree about certain things, or explore spaces, that I think we'd have better, richer content than just, hey, this is how it should be done.
Yeah. And I have one last takeaway, if you don't mind, which is going to be a little bit more of an emotional one. But, at its core, Harry Potter is a story about choices versus ability, right? And as marketers, we make choices every day about our strategy. And personally, I think you could have a strategy that's about money, big names, flashiness, like Gilderoy Lockhart.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gilderoy Lockhart.
Mum fancies him.
But ultimately, Harry defeats Voldemort because he has heart and he doesn't underestimate anyone. And he uses a simple disarming spell to defeat the greatest dark wizard of all time. So ideas can come from anywhere. Value can come from anyone. Don't underestimate your competitors. Don't underestimate yourself. And, bet on that.
Shout out Gilderoy for being low-key, extremely evil. Very evil person. She also nails just like the levels of evilness. Like, she makes people so wicked in different ways. And it's fascinating to me. She's so good at creating villains.
Gilderoy Lockhart was modeled after one of her exes, if I'm not mistaken.
They say imitation is the finest form of flattery.
He is.
Yeah, I know, right? So I have a B2B takeaway, marketing takeaway, that your B story is just as important as your A story. And I think that, people, especially young people, are so worried about all sorts of different stuff. And so are your buyers. So are your customers, right? They're not just worried about the problem that you're going to solve, for them, right? They're worried about picking their kid up from school. I heard a great quote from Aretha Franklin in an interview that said, Aretha, what's the hardest part about, being you? And, this is like one of the most famous, iconic, best singers in the history of the world. She's like, what to make for dinner every night. She's like, it's the same thing every night, what to make for dinner. It's so hard, and like, that's so great to me. That's her number one answer, right? So if you're telling the story of Aretha Franklin, you can't tell without her being sitting there at 3:00 in the afternoon, being like, I got to go to the store. I got to figure out what I'm making. Like, that stuff, that's what makes it great. And, some people like Quidditch, some people don't like Quidditch. Mileage may vary there. As a little boy, I definitely liked Quidditch and all the sports stuff. It was great. I thought it was really cool. I thought Quidditch World Cup was like a really fun scene in the stories, because sports matter to me, so that's something that I liked in the story. And I love how much Harry loves it. It's just great. And I love that Ron isn't as good at it and then finally becomes good at it. Like, that part's great. I love all the love interest stuff. Like, I think it's super important, right? It's, your friend has a girlfriend that's super annoying. Like, that's elemental to human nature, right? The boy that you like doesn't realize that you like him and you don't know how to tell him, and I'm just going to go, date the most popular person just to get their attention. Like, these are just so good, and it matters so much to the characters. And it doesn't matter that they're fighting the most evil person in the history of the world. And it doesn't matter that they're trying to solve these like crazy, ridiculous, complex things that to them, friendship and love and their hobbies and all these other things matter just as much. And in B2B marketing, so often we just completely ignore all the other parts that make us human. We talk about this like idea of like human to human marketing, and B2B people are still people, and you're still buying from a human, and you're doing, but we have the least human marketing possible. We have the least human content possible. And so I think that, finding ways to tell business stories with a B story, just add a B story into your, like, there's something else going on. Problem one is they needed to do a digital transformation. Problem two is that their kid just started playing the bassinet and they're horrible at it, and they got to listen to that thing every night. Like, give me a B story that I can at least sink my teeth into, that I can relate to, other than just the business stuff.
I had a few thoughts on just like being able to relate to the story too. One is that like, I think it's important that readers have like a favorite character too, right? Like the characters are super likable. You can kind of like have that association, but also like the houses, like giving people something to belong to, where like even people now are like, you know, oh, I'm Slytherin, you know, or whatever, you know, I'm Gryffindor. And it's something that like sticks with you. And it's like how Marketing Nation took off. And like people kind of want to have a sense of belonging, want something to associate with, to relate to in that way. And that was something that I was thinking about with this too.
I love it. Could not agree more. I mean, you look at Marketing Nation, you look at, you know, Salesforce with the Trailblazer hoodies, you look at all that stuff. Like, I mean, that matters so much, being a Salesforce admin, or, you know, being part of going to inbound with believing in inbound and all that. Like, it's just so true that it's so tribal. We are so tribal. Humans are so tribal. I was just visiting my nieces up in Canada, and they're huge into Harry Potter. And, you know, you start hurling insults at someone and you say that they'd be a Slytherin.
Yeah.
Man, it gets real quick. Then I got the like, well, they're actually not that bad. I'm like, I mean,
it only has all the most evil characters. So
yeah.
Slytherin!
There's not a witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin.
Yeah. I mean, Pansy Parkinson is not a nice person. So, you know, let's just say any wizard who went bad that wasn't in Slytherin, right? So I'm a Hufflepuff myself. So.
Okay, let's talk your role. Let's talk about content strategy and all that. Do you have a content strategy, Kendra?
Oh, yes, we definitely have a content strategy. So as I mentioned before, you know, we support the Enterprise Americas business unit at SAP Concur. So, you know, SAP is a really large organization. It's very matrixed, but, you know, this is our focus is on that particular audience, but it's a really complex audience. You know, we have regulated industries, which comprises of the federal and state governments, healthcare organizations, all the way down to mid-sized businesses. So it's a really expansive audience. So we have to be really mindful about, you know, segmenting those audiences, tailoring content to their functional biases, and really knowing what their particular journeys are. So we really keep everything centered around these 4 messaging pillars, which are really aligned to the outcomes that our customers or prospects want to achieve. Something like controlling compliance. So everything should ladder up to, okay, if this customer really cares about controls and compliance, what are the things that we're trying to help them solve? And what are the solutions that ultimately do that? And that really is sort of the strategy in a nutshell. But of course, we accomplish that through, you know, various means, different promotional channels, all sorts of content, all the way from tip sheets, those listicles that you mentioned, Ian, blogs, infographics, white papers, interactive tools, kind of the whole gambit. So really identifying what content in what channel at what time to what person is, you know, a big part of our job. And helping our stakeholders, who are really our field marketers, choose the right content for their campaigns that supports their initiatives and ultimately builds pipeline revenue for our business unit.
And then how do you think about ROI of content marketing?
Oh, the question of the day, right? I mean, isn't that magic, right? Isn't that how we measure content ROI? I mean, you know, of course, we definitely look at things, you know, traditional metrics like page views, asset consumption, conversion, you know, things like that, form fills. You know, those are things that are important to measuring your content performance. However, I really feel that you have to look at the whole picture, and that context is just as important, if not even more important, than the actual KPI. What I mean by that is, you know, what tactics are driving to that content? Was it SEO that ultimately got somebody there? Was it a banner ad? Was it direct traffic? Was it social selling? Like, are reps using this in their conversations? What is getting the audience to that content and then ultimately making that convert? I think that that's really important information for content marketers to know. Also, like, we spend a lot of time on this, and we can fall into this trap even on our team, is a lot of times we write content that's for us and not for our customers or our audience. And so, using words that mean something to them, not just mean something to you. What questions are they actually asking when they're searching for something in SEO? And is the content answering those questions? So is the audience getting what they need from you? And are they doing what you expect them to do? I think another really important thing to do is to look at maybe some untraditional metrics. We just recently did a campaign in demand base. So we showed ads to a cohort of renewal accounts. So there were people in this cohort that saw the ad and then people who didn't. The people who saw the ad or the accounts that saw the ad renewed at a rate of 24%. So I guess 24% of the accounts converted into renewals, where those that didn't see the ad, only 6% of them converted into renewals. And so I think that's really interesting because that tells us that our podcast is really effective when it comes to getting customers to renew their contracts. That's not necessarily a traditional metric that you would see in content marketing. So building that context to know when to use what type of content at what point in the funnel is something that I think can give you a lot more information than just how many people looked at my webpage.
I love that. That's awesome. And I think that's the point of content is about impact, right? It's that is the difference between content and ads. You know what I mean? Content is about impact. It's about taking someone on a journey. It's about teaching them something. And it might be something teaching them in 30 seconds. It might be something in 45 minutes. If they listen to you for a long time or hang out with you for a long time, the chances that they know, like, and trust you go way, 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 way up. Think of how many times, you've spent your life, doing something for 45 minutes or maybe hours and hours. So versus, how many times you see it. If you see a 30-second thing, 40 times, that's a lot. And so I think that the idea that those things can really move the needle on a one-to-one basis and have that impact is really, really cool. That's an awesome statistic. Okay, tell us about a campaign that you did that was really cool.
Yeah, I mentioned just mentioned our podcast. We have a podcast called SAP Concur Conversations. It's fun to have these casual conversations with our partners and our customers about their forward-leading programs of travel and expense and looking into what business challenges they have and how our solutions have helped them solve those challenges. I think last year we grew our listenership by something around 27%. We're not My Favorite Murder. We're not, anything like that. The travel and expense space is definitely niche, but that's a huge accomplishment for us. And that's a really successful thought leadership channel for us. It's really big with our sellers. And so that's something that we find is super shareable. So we'll take the 27% increase, right? So that's something that I continue to be super excited about from a storytelling perspective, especially really interesting stories that our customers and partners have told on the podcast.
Obviously, as a company makes podcast and video series, I am thrilled with the success of SAP Concur Conversations. And it's just a testament to, I think, that you have to make something and push thought-provoking conversations and, get and co-create content with your customers and prospects. Sometimes it's not rocket science, co-create with the people that are actually doing it. So awesome to hear about the success there. What is your best piece of advice for directors of content strategy?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a little bit about this in the previous question, but what are the questions that your audience is actually asking? What are they looking for? I think this is super overlooked area of marketing, especially content marketing. When we came to our SEO manager about this and we were we want to do a pillar strategy that's based on survey the public, questions that people are actually typing into Google. He was hallelujah. So I think this is something that people just are oh, I'm going to write a blog about, and I'll use our own example here. I'll write a blog about audit efficiencies. Well, what does that mean to somebody who's, looking to create an audit strategy for their expense reporting process? Nothing. If a finance manager, wants to know what to do to audit expense reports, they're going to type something in what is the best way to audit expense reports, or what is the frequency I should be auditing expense reports. They're not going to be typing in, what is my audit efficiency? And so I think taking a step back and saying, what is the customer actually looking for, and write content that supports those questions. I think that's, a big piece of advice. That's a lesson that we've learned over the last couple of years that I think is, changed the way that we write, to be quite honest. So spend some time on Survey the Public or whatever your SEO tool is. Don't put yourself at the center of your marketing, put your customer or your prospect there.
Yeah, it's such a great reminder. And I think that it's about positioning your audience for, are they looking to learn or are they looking to find a solution, right? It's like one of the things, this is an aside, but one of the things that people are like, well, why don't you make a podcast about making a podcast? I'm like, well, we make podcasts for people. So if they want to make one with us, they can just make one with us. And it's like, that's one way to do it. But it's like, I'm actually more interested in talking about lots of other things that marketers can do with their time, effort, energy, and resources. And that's what I want to focus on, is like helping them do X, Y, Z. So it's just like, I think that there's so much that people get obsessed with find the solution of the problem rather than like, what is the thing that they're looking to learn about? If you want to write content about AI, then figure out what people are searching for AI, right? Like, how should marketing use AI in 2024? Or like, et cetera, et cetera. So I love that piece of advice.
Yeah. Circling this back to Harry Potter, we mentioned it several times already that J.K. Rowling knew her audience. Like, she knew that these were kids that were growing up with, or parents that had kids that they wanted them to read. Back to your story earlier, Ian, like knowing that these are kids that are coming up in a world where they want to believe in magic and they want to be included and they want to feel special. Like, I think, that's something that, the books and J.K. Rowling did really successfully. And I think that's something that, we should strive to do as marketers too, is to put the person that we're speaking to at the center of our content.
I love that. Could not agree more. Kendra, wonderful having you on the show. For our listeners, if you need travel and expense solutions, go to SAP Concur to learn more. Kendra, any final thoughts, anything to plug?
No, we'll check out SAP Concur Conversations podcast. And it was just a pleasure talking to both of you today about Harry Potter and content marketing. And thanks so much for having me.
Mischief managed. Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.